Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. If you have heard of the Challenger sale, it has sold over 1 million copies as a book, and what has been built off of that is the Challenger methodology. We have the SVP of Sales, who sells all of the Challenger deals for Challenger. His name is Dan Flood. Nick, why should people listen?
So one of the main tenets of the Challenger sale methodology is take control. And Dan teaches us how to uber control the sales process in a way that is actually in your customer's best interest. If you want to learn how to do that, this is a very good episode to help you figure out how you pull them through legal, finance, getting to power, building the right type of business case, etc.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
Alrighty, Dan, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get your 3.
My first big recommendation is to, rather than listening to what your buyers are saying, watch what your buyers are doing. Because oftentimes there's a chasm between what people say and what they do, especially on the buying side. So one of the things we encourage our sellers to do is to watch what buyers are doing, study it, and then use that as a better barometer for how strong the deal is. So as an example, we might look at how much clout your main point of contact has in being able to pull other stakeholders into the conversation. An example might be, if you know that a CFO needs to be involved in purchasing your solution, we will say, great, let's bring your CFO onto a call. And if your main point of contact says, great, and the CFO shows up to that call, you know that you're actually dealing with somebody that we would call a mobilizer that can actually drive to a group decision. But if that main point of contact gives you hesitation about wanting to bring those stakeholders in, if they say, sure, I can do it, but then they struggle to get the call set, or they get this call set and then that person never shows up to the call, right? Those are red flags, because what that shows you is that person actually doesn't have the political capital to get those things done. Being able to actually look at observable behavior rather than statements of intention, that's what gets you away from the quote unquote happy ears that everyone always talks about in my experience.
Amazing. What's number 2?
Okay, so my second tip would be to ask pointed and hard questions of your buyers throughout the sales process. There's this cliche that a lot of times sellers don't want to ask the hard question because they're worried about what the answer might be. But I feel that if you ask those difficult questions very early in the sales process, you're going to give yourself a better chance of understanding objections very early as well. A good example might be if you're running a demo of your solution for a client, and at the end of that, you might reserve 10 minutes at the end of your call to say, hey, look, we can spend hours on this demo. I could take you through this for the next several hours and deep dive into everything, but I want to pause and actually just ask, how is this landing? And in particular, I'm really curious to know where you see this working and what you're skeptical about. They'll tell you right out of the gate, right? Because what you're trying to do is get the seeds of objections out very early so you can help work on those later on. If you don't do that, those objections are going to sit and brew and continue to grow over time. And that's what leads to people ghosting you later on.
Really good. Round us out, Dan. What's number 3?
Number 3 is being able to effectively teach throughout the sales process. There is a lot of research out there that leads us into this idea that B2B buying and selling is in absolute chaos right now. It's what we call the chaos spiral, meaning that 3 out of 4 buyers never want to talk to a salesperson, and 40 to 60% of deals end in no decision, right? If we look at all of that, part of how we are able to drive deals forward, but ultimately help teach our clients throughout the process and drive confidence, is being able to use your closing process as a way to mutually educate your client and learn yourself. So rather than just saying, talk to me about your decision-making process or talk to me about your legal process, for which they'll say, yeah, legal usually takes a couple weeks, procurement's going to need to get involved. If you use it as a teaching process and say, in my experience, legal usually takes 2 weeks longer than they say they're going to, or procurement usually is going to want to ask for a discount. Is that going to happen in this process? What you're doing is you're helping them plan for all of the unplanned things that can happen and the obstacles that they're going to face. And I think what this really gets to is that as sellers, we have to remember we sell a whole lot more than buyers buy. If you're a buyer, you might buy something once or twice a year. And certainly your purchasing process, your approval process has probably changed since the last time you bought something. But if you're a seller, you're doing this stuff every day. You know the obstacles that your buyer is going to face, all of the objections they're going to get from their different stakeholders. And if you can teach your main point of contact about those obstacles and objections throughout the process, you're actually going to improve their confidence in you, that you are someone that knows what you're talking about.
In the prep, you said there are really two cornerstones of the challenger methodology and how you think about selling. It's number one, determine if it's a real opportunity. And then number two, uber control the buying process. Let's start with number one. What do you look for to determine that you have a real opportunity in front of you?
One of the things that we talk about at Challenger is being able to quickly disqualify bad opportunities. So you're not wasting your time on them for months. But how do you do that? One of the things that we talk to our sellers about is leading with a hypothesis and presenting a teaching moment right out of the gate to your buyer. For us, what that might sound like is we help improve sales effectiveness for enterprise sales organizations. If you're a head of sales and your sales are lagging, you might say, we need more pipeline, right? We just need a lot more at-bats for our sellers. Our conversion rate is whatever it is, 20%. And so if I get X amount more pipe, that's going to make it happen. But an insight for us might be, do you realize that the data would suggest that you're losing half of your pipeline to just pure no decision, right? Not competitors. And those are controllable deals that you can win. Have you considered that? Have you thought about that? And what we're looking for is the reaction of those buyers in presenting that type of insight to them. If we presented them that half of your deals are no decision and they say, oh yeah, that makes total sense, absolutely. A lot of times sellers go, great, they agree with me, but that's wrong. That's actually a very bad response, because those are the people that we would call talkers that readily agree with everyone, and they can't drive deals to conclusion later on, right? But if you get a response from someone early on where they're actually probing for better understanding, that can be much more effective. So what that might sound like from your buyer is, I guess I haven't really thought about that. Tell me more. Like, where are you getting that from? And sometimes they might even express some skepticism. Wait a minute, I'm not sure I see that in our world. Where are you getting this data from? Why do you think it applies to our business this way? That can feel scary to a seller because they're worried, like, oh, this person's disagreeing with me. That means they're not going to like my solution. But what they're actually doing is probing for understanding. That's the type of behavior that someone who can drive deals and drive consensus exhibits early on, right? So if you see that type of action, you can hitch your wagon to that opportunity knowing they've got a problem I can solve. And they're exhibiting the behavior that shows me that they know how to navigate politically and have the right clout in their organization to drive a deal to a decision, a group decision, which is really needed.
So what do I do in the situation where I'm just crushing my discovery? Like, I'm nailing all the problems and they're like, oh my God, you get it. How do I parse out the negative signal of someone who's just agreeing with me versus me just doing really good discovery?
A lot of times in kind of traditional discovery sense, we're looking to understand, okay, what's the tech stack? Do they have the core problem that we believe we can solve? Do they have budget? Am I talking to the right person? Those are all important things to understand. However, if you're not actually getting to the root of, does this person believe that they have the problem that I can solve? Focus on the problem first, right? Before you go into this solution about, here's how we can help you solve it. Going back to the reactions that you're going to get from people, this is what's going to tell you whether you can drive forward. A lot of common reactions from people that are really positive but can't get deals done are things like, I think this sounds great. I should be able to get approval on this. I definitely want to do this. Getting strict signature should be pretty straightforward, right? When someone says, oh, I'm the decision maker or I'm the budget holder, to me, that actually says that they don't really understand how decisions are made at their organization. And that's a major red flag. If someone thinks they are the decision maker, because there's no such thing as the decision maker in enterprise selling these days. The decisions are made by committee. Contrast that with people that are actually able to drive decisions to completion. These would be people that respond to the teaching moment you've put forward, the insight, the hypothesis, with a little bit of healthy skepticism. They're not being jerks or anything. They're just trying to probe for understanding, saying, I'm not sure I buy that. Tell me more about it. That's a good cue to hear from. People that reference the metrics and KPIs of their business. That's another thing to be looking for. When they start getting into, our conversion rate is this. That tells me that they're actually pretty dialed in to knowing that stuff. But have you ever been on the phone with a prospect and you say, what's your close rate? And they're like, I'm not sure. I got to look into that. Again, red flag. They use we rather than I. They're thinking already about group consensus rather than me being able to get this done. I already mentioned they get important stakeholders to show up to meetings. They complete the tasks that you actually ask them to do. If they need to find a piece of data for you, they find it. Again, it gets back to watching what people do rather than what they say. And then they are able to share specifics about the decision-making process. Our CFO needs to approve it. CRO's on board. Legal's already started reviewing the paperwork rather than, oh yeah, we're working on it. Like generalizations, those are really bad. That's how we coach our sellers to be looking for the cues that show us that this opportunity is viable and that it's going to move forward in a meaningful way.
Let's assume that I've determined that I have a real opportunity in front of me. Person has a real problem. They're asking discerning questions. They seem like a real champion. The next piece is controlling the buying process once you know you have a champion with a real problem. Where does that start?
Let's say you go through an initial discovery call, and that might be with someone in sales enablement for us. We finally get to a point where we feel like we've got a good problem, a problem that we can solve, rather than saying, all right, what do you think is the next step here? Who should be involved? A different take on that might be, all right, in my experience, the next step in this process would probably be to get your head of sales into this conversation, because if they don't buy this solution, they don't buy the problem, then we're really not going anywhere. It's going to fail at some point later on. So I'd recommend bringing that person into the conversation, and then maybe one or two of their direct reports, senior sales leaders that can navigate the conversation. But look, I don't know your organization. What do you think about that? So you're kind of suggesting and teaching throughout the process. You want them to get to a point where they're like, yeah, actually, you know what? Nick knows what he's talking about here, and I do need to get my head of sales involved. But what you're doing is offering those little suggestions, which helps you control the opportunity, but you're teaching along the way. So often when we talk about mutual action plans and closing processes, those can get a bad rap because it feels like we're just trying to turn all the screws at the finish line. But it's an incredible way to build confidence and continue to teach your buyers how to buy throughout the process. I guess the last thing I would say about that is controlling the process. It truly does need to happen at every single step of the way. You can't leave your buyers to make the choice on what the next step is going to be, because that will end in no decision.
What I'm hearing is when you put a hypothesis in front of your customer, whether it's at the beginning of that discovery call or it's your hypothesis of how we should navigate this, it gives them an opportunity to disagree, whether it's with your hypothesis or your next step, which is going to get you far more information and get both of you to a place of mutual understanding far more effectively than just asking, so what matters to you at the beginning of the discovery call, or so what should next steps be at the very end?
Oftentimes we will say to our customers, hey, look, this is our hypothesis. I'm quite sure we got something wrong here. Tell us where we got it wrong. Sometimes you might get them to say, that's mostly right, but here's this thing. Or they might say, that's actually kind of spot on. So you're right on point. But that suggestion is a very powerful tool.
I want to dig back in on teaching them how to buy as part of Uber controlling the buying process. So you can, one, challenge the hypothesis on the problem, but then two, you can also challenge how they're going to justify or position it to the rest of the org. What are you listening for when a champion is not going to justify it the right way? And then how do you correct them to do it the right way?
Let's say we have someone that is a point of contact in one of our clients or prospective clients, and they're going to take our proposal to their CFO. It actually can be especially dangerous with existing clients, right? Where say it's a renewal and expansion proposal, and we'll say, okay, you're going to take this to the CFO now. We just got to get their approval. Great. What are they looking for in this proposal? And if I hear something like, oh, you know what? They get it. They're bought in on Challenger. They love it. This is more of a check the box kind of exercise, but they're all in. They get it. That to me is a major red flag, because people don't buy on getting it or liking a solution. They buy on how your solution is going to drive the economics of their business. So being able to ask, does your CFO have a clear understanding of the ROI of this investment? Has your CFO seen this proposal before? Do they even know that this is coming? And that can also be really telling, because if they're like, no, I got to bring them up to speed. Whoa, okay, I'm forecasting this deal to close in 30 days and the CFO has no idea it's coming. That's a problem. But I've prepped them, they know that this is coming, we've put our business case together, we've been able to quantify what the return will be, and we've already mapped out what the delivery schedule is going to look like. That's way more specificity. That gives me a whole lot more confidence that I can start banking on the forecastability of this deal rather than one that sounds way up in the air.
When you ask a question rather than tell them, it helps them protect their status, and they're prevented from looking silly, which might make them get a little bit more resistant to you.
Rather than thinking about what do I want to say, reframe it to what do I want to ask. And that's exactly why it puts people less on the defensive, and it also forces them to think. Rather than just nodding at your suggestion, they have to think through the solution.
This happens often with the legal review process where sellers will hear, I got a verbal commit, I want to buy, I got finance approval, and they want to close by the end of the month. And so they ask, how long does legal usually take? And they're like, it should be good by the end of the month. And then in the last week of the month, you're getting the first cuts on your red line and your entire contract has been rewritten. And so this is a great place where you need to start looking for trouble. So let's say I have 3 or 4 weeks to close and I'm doing mid-market or lower enterprise sales. That's a tight timeline for most legal reviews. So the moment I know a contract is going into legal review, you have to chunk up legal review into smaller steps. And that's how you test your prospect. So the first question I'm going to ask is not how long does legal take, but I'm going to say, how long does it usually take legal to prioritize a contract? Or even how long does it take to get a contract to the top of the queue? And if they're not familiar with the concept of a contract queue, because legal teams sit on multiple contracts, I'm like, I'm going to need to get in front of these legal people myself because this person clearly has not bought software. And so you break the legal process down into multiple pieces. The first part is doing first cuts, which requires you to get your contract put in the queue. And then there are your revisions and the second cuts, third cuts, fourth cuts, fifth cuts, etc. And then there's usually a legal to legal call at the end to hammer out some of the nitty gritty issues. And so what you want to do is, based on your sales cycle, you want to set mini deadlines for each of those things. We call those red line deadlines. So I'm going to set a 4-day deadline for first cuts back, a 6-day deadline for second cuts, and an 8-day deadline for third cuts. Then I'm going to pre-schedule the legal to legal call on day 12, and that's going to get it on the legal team's radar, which is going to make them prioritize the contract more quickly.
I love what you were just saying there. I might add is being able to actually sprinkle in anecdotes from real experience, right? But maybe an example of that might be, the reason I'm telling you this is a lot of times legal teams seem like they're on the same page and the same timeline, and then we'll end up getting extensive red lines the day before the contract is supposed to be signed. And you can imagine our team needs time to review it. We have to scramble to get everyone on a call. By the time we finally finalize it at the 11th hour, the CFO is off on vacation. We want to avoid that mad scramble at the end. And when you put it in real anecdotal terms like that, it makes it real for your buyer too, who can go, oh gosh, yeah, I could easily see that happening. So I do need to prioritize. I love the red line deadlines piece. I'd not heard that phrase before, but it makes a lot of sense.
A lot of times sellers tell prospects when they need to do things in the seller's best interest. Like, you got to do this thing so that we can sign our deal fast enough. But instead what you did is you reframed, hey, you want to go live here, or you need to solve this problem by this date. And I've just seen so many times where there's someone who needs the help, like yourself, and then what ends up happening is we literally have to delay your go live because the legal team didn't realize that this was due completely done in 4 weeks, not first cuts in 4 weeks. And so you always frame the process, or the way you push the deal is always in their best interest instead of your best interest as a seller.
Prospects and buyers can smell that stuff too, right? If it just feels like you're twisting their arm. If I'm a buyer, I'm a lot less interested in matching the urgency if it just feels like you're twisting my arm. But if we've been collaborative, I've taught you throughout the sales process and I've given you a differentiated experience, and I want to make sure that this go live date is valuable to my business, then all of a sudden, yeah, I do want to drive this forward, and I do need babysitters to help make this happen on time.
So we've talked about challenging people on finance approval. The red flag we're looking for is they don't care to check the box. What we do instead is we put together a proper case with problems, numbers, etc. We talked about challenging people in terms of multi-threading and getting access to power. We need to get in front of these people to get the deal done. If not, they're like, I can approve it all. That's your red flag. And then we just talked about legal red flags. It'll get done in a month. I'm sure it'll be fine. Instead, we chop it up into red line deadlines. There's one last place in a buying process worth challenging prospects on, and that's on the evaluation itself. And so a lot of times prospects will be like, great, I love this. Sounds like you can solve a problem. I want to do 20 demos with everyone and then get a sandbox environment and then do like a 4-month POC and have every single human being in the organization look at this thing. Talk to me about how you challenge someone on the evaluation process itself.
So the first is too many requests. That could be, I want to get a demo access for everyone out of the sandbox. I want 5 customer reference calls set up. Whatever it is. I think a lot of times when you get into that, you're getting into this indecision spiral. And it's because in today's buying environment, people are very risk averse. They're worried about making a mistake that's going to come back to bite them, and they've got their name on this big purchase that failed. I like to ask a buyer, and I'll coach my reps to do the same, to ask them, what are you trying to learn in this request? I mean, the customer reference is one of the best ones. What are you hoping to get out of that? Do you really think I'm going to put you on the phone with someone who says our product sucks? No, we're not going to do that. Of course, we're going to give you a positive reference. You're going to walk away from it going, yeah, is that truly a check the box for you, just so that you've shown you've done your due diligence? Or are you actually hoping to learn something out of that? And if you're getting multiple requests, that's where you can almost walk them out of the, what new information are you getting out of this that you don't already have, right? And so I think that's an important slow down to speed up type thing. A lot of times the sellers quickly want to say yes to every request, but it's fine to slow down and ask what they're trying to get out of it. The other thing I think is important when you do that too is to qualify it, right? Look, I'm happy to get you on the phone with 3 clients. However, as you can imagine, these are busy people, right? I wouldn't take your time to do this kind of stuff as well. So I really only want to do this if this is the last step in the process. What I don't want to have happen is you get on the phone, our customer gives you an awesome testimonial, and then you come back and say, oh yeah, we just couldn't get the budget approved. So let's handle all the basics first and then make sure this is the last step before we set that up. Nothing drives me more crazy than when we set up reference calls and then it dies even though it was a great reference call.
It's making me think of an example. I used to sell ERP software to law firms, and I'll never forget, I got an inbound request from someone who said, hey, before I even talk with you, Nick, I need to get 5 reference clients in the Phoenix area to talk with. My first reaction was no, and I just shut them down, and there was a lost opportunity. I think what I should have done was 1, figured out, what are they trying to learn? 2, said, yeah, we can put you in touch with these people. And then also added the piece of, I want to make sure that you know where to press on these references to understand where we're strong and where we're not as strong, because we're certainly not perfect. We're going to put you in front of good references, and you should just know that. I could go find 5 good references, but I actually want to make your calls better. And that's why I'm suggesting we follow this process instead.
I want to bring this full circle to something you said at the beginning of the interview, Dan, which is the difference between customer support and being an advisor. If I walk into a doctor's office and I say, I need aspirin or I need painkillers, that's not my job. I'm stepping in as a patient and I'm prescribing myself a solution. It's my job to say, I have knee pain. It's the doctor's job to say, you have knee pain. Let me tweak your knee in different directions, do these rehab exercises, and figure out why you're having this knee pain. And then I'm going to tell you how to solve the problem. And so you ask for problems. You tell for solutions. So you don't let them self-prescribe a solution. You try to understand, what is the concern you have with moving forward with us? Or what are you skeptical about? Maybe it's, I'm worried that your product might not be customizable for how we do our reporting. That's a concern. It's my job to tell you the best way to solve that is not through a customer reference or looking at a case study. It's by doing a more customized demo. I find that too many sellers let buyers dictate the buying process when you should be dictating the buying process.
You mentioned proof of concepts. That's a very popular thing right now. I'm okay with a proof of concept, But when buyers say proof of concept, what they're really saying is, what is the cheapest, least risky way to test this out without screwing up my whole business? They're thinking about a way out if it goes wrong, but they are not thinking about what happens if this goes right. And so oftentimes for my sellers, we'll talk about, if we're going to do this proof of concept, it still requires work. We want to know that you're invested in buying the full suite if this goes really well. Here's what that would cost. Are you prepared to do that if we meet whatever the success criteria of the proof of concept is? And a lot of times you can just walk yourself out of that proof of concept idea by going there because you end up talking about the full solution anyways. Or you better qualify the larger opportunity on what happens after the POC is done.
Dan, this has been a phenomenal episode, but the clock is ticking. We're running out of time, and we got to move to the final question. We've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. Now we got to flip that question on its head and ask you about a shouldn't. What is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Okay, there's probably a lot I can answer, but what immediately comes to mind is time management and time blocking of your calendar. If you are a seller, your most precious resource is your time. We get distracted all the time. I've got notifications going off on my laptop right now from Teams and emails and stuff. But if we don't turn those off and find time for high leverage activities, whether that's prospecting, deal analysis, responding to inbound leads, qualifying out my pipeline, whatever it is, I need to block out my day and be incredibly disciplined about how I'm spending my time so that I move the needle every single week. That is so important because as sellers, a lot of times we get to the end of the week and we're like, what did I even get done this week? Nothing. So like, how are you being really intentional and disciplined with controlling your calendar? One tip I could actually give people, and I learned it a few years ago, is block out time on your calendar for the unplanned stuff that's going to come out throughout your day. Put a block of time on your calendar that's just a hold, right? Half an hour at the end of the day. And that feels weird for people because they're like, I don't have anything to do in that time. How many things are going to come up throughout the course of the day that you're going to need to get to? I need to respond to this email. I need to proof this thing. I need to work on this proposal. This client is coming to me with an urgent request. That's what you're planning for. You're planning for the unplanned. And so if you can control your calendar in that way, I think that makes for an incredibly effective salesperson. In fact, one of the biggest red flags I see is when I go to a seller and there's just complete white space on their calendar. That, to me, is what are you doing?
Amazing. Dan, thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Dan Flood. What do you have for your 2?
Number 1 is, instead of asking your prospect, what are your biggest challenges, what keeps you up at night, or hey, what do next steps look like? Instead, give them hypotheses, make recommendations, because that invites them to disagree with your hypothesis, which gets you both to a place of better mutual understanding. Number 2 is, instead of thinking about what do I want to say to the prospect, think about what do I want to ask. When you're trying to control the process, instead of you saying this is what needs to happen next, find a way to ask that in a question. That will protect your prospect's status and make you seem less pushy or aggressive.
Number 3, you ask for problems, you teach for process. You have to understand what's important to a prospect as they're evaluating a tool or what problem they're trying to solve, but it's your job as a seller to tell them that a custom demo is a better route than a POC, for example. And then lastly, number 4, whenever you get the sense that someone's trying to throw unnecessary steps in your deal cycle, always ask them the question behind their request, which is, what are you trying to learn through that POC? Or what are you trying to learn through your 17 reference calls? And usually you will find that there is another way to learn that thing. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So in this episode, we talked about the concept of a red line deadline, which is one of the best ways to control the legal and finance review, the vendor review period of your deals, which is where a lot of deals get stuck. Armand, I know you are writing, and it should be out by the time this episode airs, an entire newsletter of the 30 MPC newsletter that teaches how to run the red line deadline. So if you want it, it's free. It's in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the show.